There is one really important thing you can do today to make a fundamental difference to your finances. Start building an emergency fund. If you want to worry less about your finances, build wealth and avoid debt, it all starts with an emergency fund. One of my lowest points since entering adulthood was when I had a £150 repair bill for my car and I couldn't pay it. I was already overdrawn and I literally just did not have the funds anywhere. And after that, I just never ever wanted to be anywhere near in that kind of position again. And that was all down to the fact that I wasn't looking ahead to the things that could potentially go wrong, as well as the fact that I was not thinking about my budget. I was not spending below my means. I've been riding the roller coaster of working for myself from home for about 6 years now. Even in times when I have had my highest earning months, I have been so grateful to have the peace of mind that my emergency fund gives me, because at those points where I've been in my lowest earning months, it's been such a lifesaver to have it there. The purpose of your emergency fund is to cover you in case the unexpected happens. And let's face it, in life, it's going to. Life is messy and there's always something right around the corner that is going to cost you money. The boiler packs in, or you have to pay for a roof repair, or you lose your job. Worst case scenario is that more than one thing happens at the same time. If you're living paycheck to paycheck and you have no money left at the end of every month, then an emergency can tip you into debt. And then another one comes up, but you can't cover that cost either, so that pushes you further into debt. The more debt you're having to pay off every month with those dreadful interest rates, the worse it gets. It is a vicious cycle, and that is going to hold you back financially. But there's a solution: building your emergency fund. What if you've been watching the investment bros and the rich girl era chicks on TikTok and you're thinking, emergency fund sounds really boring. I want to get into like my rich girl era right away, start investing. Advice to savers is usually to get your emergency fund in place. I know, boring, but it's there for a good reason. Your investments are a long game. Over time, assuming that history can be relied upon, your investments will grow. The S&P 500, for example, has on average delivered 10% returns over time. But notice what I said there, over time. In some years, investments will make losses. What you don't want to end up in is a situation where you have to withdraw money from your investment funds in order to cover an emergency. When you invest, you need to be able to lock that money away for years. And that's why the emergency fund is so crucial, because it safeguards your investments, so you don't need to touch them. Your emergency funds, on the other hand, need to be readily available to you. So how much should be in your emergency fund? Most financial experts suggest between 3 to 6 months of your regular expenses should be set aside in an emergency fund. So let's say you spend £2,500 a month on essentials, then you're going to need to put aside £7,500 into that emergency fund. Obviously that total is going to very much depend on what your monthly expenses are. And if that sounds like a lot to you, I agree with you, it kind of is, particularly when you look at the statistics for how much the average person actually has saved. The average total savings for people in the US is $8,000, while in the UK it's £11,000. You've got to remember that those figures are skewed by the very wealthy, the people with millions in the bank. So it might make you feel a little bit better to know that 46% of people have 1k or less in savings. If you have 1k or more in savings, then you're doing pretty well. If you're not there yet, don't sweat, we're going to talk about how you can get there. Now that suggestion of having 3 to 6 months set aside in your emergency fund is just that, it's just a suggestion. This is not an exact science, and it really does depend on your lifestyle. If you're very frugal, if you have a car that is very reliable, unlikely to break down, say you've paid off your mortgage or very nearly paid off your mortgage, there's going to be less pressure on that emergency fund should things go wrong. So what can be helpful is to think about what your specific worst case scenario is. It's probably going to be losing your job, and then go from there. If you're just starting out, why not just aim for the first 1,000, then 1 month worth of expenses, and then go from there. But just a word of warning, there is going to come a point where you want to stop putting money into that emergency fund. There is absolutely no point in having 100k in an emergency fund that's not paying you very much interest and having nothing in pension and investments. And we're going to talk more about that in a minute. So how can you actually save for your emergency fund? I'm going to give you 3 ideas for how you can do this. First of all, break it down into smaller steps. Everything feels less daunting when you just take it one little step at a time. time. Let's say you want to have an emergency fund in place in 24 months time and your goal is £7,500. You're going to need to save about £310 a month in order to meet that goal in 24 months. Now, if that is not achievable for you, then start with what you can afford, but commit to a regular percentage that you can afford to set aside. And that leads me on to the second tip, which is to make sure that you're automating your savings. Make it a non-negotiable part of your budget that you are paying into this emergency fund every single month. Make it a direct debit. It leaves your account not long after your income has hit so that you can't spend it. And by the way, just going back a couple of steps, before you even think about this, if you have got high interest debt, like credit card debt, you should be aiming to pay that off first, because the high interest rates on that is going to be holding you back. You want to clear that, because realistically, there's not going to be any like interest gains you can make on savings that will make up for what you lose and the high interest that you are paying on a debt. And finally, why not try a savings challenge or micro savings apps? There are various different savings challenges out there. There's the penny challenge, there's the 100 envelope challenge. I'm going to put a link in the description below to a whole list of savings challenges ideas so that you can check them out. Micro savings habits are a really nice way of saving small, affordable amounts on a regular basis. With apps like Plum or with your own banking app, you can opt in to do roundups, which is where the app will automatically calculate the difference between each of your transactions and the nearest pound and set that money aside into a savings pot for you. So where should you actually put an emergency fund? Your emergency fund needs to be easily accessible so that you can get to it in emergency, right? However, what you don't want to do is leave it languishing in a low interest account, or even worse, stuff it under your mattress. On this channel, I don't dish out advice for specifics of which account you should use, but the answer as to where your emergency fund should be is that it should be in an easy access saver, because if you're going to need to get to it in an emergency, it needs to be easy access. You may want to look for something that doesn't have penalties for making multiple withdrawals on it in a year if you think that you might have to call upon your emergency fund more than once in a year, and you want to look for the best interest rate possible that you can find. What you may want to do is put a percentage of your emergency fund into a very, very easy access saver with a lower interest rate, and then put the bulk of it into an easy access saver that has a better interest rate but maybe has a limit on withdrawals. This is just something to consider when you get to a point where you have a much bigger emergency fund pot. Say you get to the point where you get over £5,000, maybe you want to think about putting a little bit in an account that has a less lucrative return on the interest rate, and the chunk of it in an account that's still easy access but is giving you a better return on that money. And don't be afraid to shop around and move the money if there's a better deal elsewhere. Your emergency fund is there to help you avoid debt and stress. However, it's your longer term savings, your investments and your pension that are really going to help you build wealth. The emergency fund is like the foundation that helps you to get started. So don't allow your commitment to your emergency fund make you neglect other savings options. This is a secret of the rich that we can really learn from. They're prepared for short-term emergencies, but they're diversifying where their money is in order to take advantage of long-term growth. Us mere mortals have less money to play with than the super rich, of course. When you take the long view, there's still opportunities to build your wealth. Even if you only put away 50 quid a month, 50 quid a month put away for 20 years in an account that's giving you a 6% return means that after 20 years, you have 22 grand. And you can ensure that you have that 50 quid spare every single month by having that emergency fund in place to protect and safeguard your finances.